As most of you know, our family moved back to Ohio from Kansas. We were living out in Kansas, and Kansas is known for sunflowers and for wheat fields, but maybe most of all for, most of all for tornadoes, right? There's Dorothy, and man, that was a bad day, right? But maybe a good day. I don't know. Things turned from black and white to color for her in just a few minutes right there. But anyway, no. So tornadoes is maybe what Kansas is known for most of all. Actually, in moving to seminary, so we graduated from college, went on our honeymoon, came back, and moved halfway across the country within like 3 weeks. And it was just a life-changing opportunity for us. We headed to seminary in Kansas City, and actually as a welcome, as we headed across from St. Louis, heading toward Kansas in the middle of Missouri, things started getting wild and crazy, and a storm was blowing up. We actually stopped and pulled over, and we found out later that there had been a tornado that moved through right through that area just nearby on our way out. The huge green signs were bent over like they were cardboard, and those big metal just kind of and the billboards were splintered and the trees were down, and I mean it was quite a welcome to Kansas for us. There's something I didn't know, though. I thought, okay, well, yeah, I've seen storms, big deal. Just go in the basement and ride it out and whatever. What I learned that I didn't know until we lived there is that although they have a lot of tornadoes, there aren't a lot of houses with basements. The soil has a high sand content, and it can't necessarily support basements like most of our houses have around here. And so the whole dive into the basement for a little while wasn't going to happen. We actually, I remember at least 3 different occasions through the time that we lived out there in a couple of different places. The tornado warning came, and we didn't have a basement, and so we grabbed the kids and the cat and the dog and some snacks and some games, and we headed to the church basement. And we rode out the storm in the church. I mean, it's a good place. If you're going to go somewhere, hang out at church during the storm. Thankfully, nothing ever came too close. We headed back home. But storms can be scary. I love the story about the kid who was getting tucked into bed one night by his mom, and a thunderstorm was moving in, and he's a little nervous about all that. She was about to turn off the light. And he asked her in his little trembly voice, "Mommy, can you stay with me all night tonight?" And smiling, the mother gave him a warm hug and said, "Now, honey, I can't. I've got to sleep in our room with Daddy." And there was a brief pause, and then the kid said, "The big sissy." You have your own stories about storms, I'm sure, things that you've weathered. You might be, we could take a poll today maybe. Are you we don't have to. Some of you are the people that when they say tornado warning, instead of going to the basement, you're heading to the front porch, right? And there's I see that hand. We can have testimony time. Others of you, maybe you try to make sure you follow it on TV, and you watch them as they break in and all the things, and you're watching on your app, and you're trying to figure. But storms are, they happen. Storms happen, right? They happen everywhere. Around here, we have thunderstorms and windstorms and snowstorms. There's thunder and lightning and hail and high winds and flooding and snow drifts and icy roads and all of that stuff. Not today, though. I guess maybe, I should have preached this sermon 2 or 3 weeks ago when the snow was moving in, right? We should have had it during a storm. In other places around the world, there are other kinds of storms. There are hurricanes and typhoons and cyclones, and I don't know. There's a whole lot of different names for storms, but I don't think that there is a place on the planet that is exempt from storms. And I don't think there is a person on the planet who is exempt from storms. We all face things in life that we could call storms, things that blow up out of nowhere, cause damage, and many times they seem like they'll never relent. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been looking at some of the questions Jesus asked in his ministry. I hope that these questions are sparking some insights for you like they did for Jesus' disciples and for the people and the crowds around him. The first two questions we've looked at over the last 2 Sundays, Jesus was asking to 2 specific people, right? In the context of miracles that he performed on their behalf. We had blind Bartimaeus, and we had the woman with the issue of blood. And Jesus was asking them specifically these questions right to them. The question we're going to look at today is one that Jesus asked to all 12 of his disciples all at one shot, right after they had gone through a doozy of a storm on the waters of the Sea of Galilee. And I think you'll find that this is a question that you and I need to answer too as we encounter the storms in our life. We're going to read the account from Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. One day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked the disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Maybe you've heard that story before. Don't get it confused with when Jesus walked on water. Same lake, different storm. It's a pretty simple story, really. 4 verses. We just read 4 verses, and yet there's all kinds of drama packed into those 4 verses. We're amazed by God's miraculous intervention in that storm. With a few words of rebuke, it was all over. But I think the big impact of the story rests in Jesus' question there to his disciples. After everything had calmed down, he said, "Where is your faith? Where is your faith?" And I hope maybe over the next little bit here today, that question will be ringing in your ears and running around your mind. Where is your faith? Although this is only about a third of the way through the book of Luke, this event on the lake takes place kind of nearer the end of Jesus' ministry than the beginning. So by this point, Jesus had become quite a celebrity of sorts. He was gathering big crowds wherever he went. The Gospels emphasize that several times that Jesus was having some issues dealing with all these crowds. He's trying to get things done, and they're pushing in. And he's telling people, don't tell people about me. And they went and told people, and the crowds grew, and all the things. And just previous to this story, Jesus' own mother and brothers were trying to get to him, and they couldn't even get in. It says because of the crowd. So Jesus figured it's time to head across the lake, right? It doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but they'd been going around from town to town, and so maybe it wasn't that big of a thing for the disciples to hear Jesus say, "Man, this is getting a little out of hand. Let's go across the lake." Maybe it even felt like an excursion, a change of pace. I don't know. Get out on the water and just kind of enjoy each other and rest for a little bit. I want us to get a little perspective on this. Maybe you've seen or heard of there's some videos and such called Drive-Through History. Dave Stott's Drive-Through History. He goes to the Holy Land and goes to a lot of some other places around to talk about a lot of the things that happen in the Bible, and he's actually on site in those places and talks about it. He has a whole series all based on the America and the founding of our country, and a lot of kids, I think, use it for homeschooling stuff. And anyway, good stuff. Google Drive-Through History, whatever. I want to play just a clip from Dave Stott's today, Drive-Through History, telling us about Jesus calming the storm. Let's watch this.
Now, after Jesus had been teaching all day on the Sea of Galilee, he instructed his disciples to get into a boat with him and travel to the other side. Now, as we've learned, observant Jews stuck pretty closely to the northwestern region of the Sea of Galilee. The other side represented everything that was impure decadent and sinful, certainly not Jewish. Now, the Greeks and then the Romans built up 10 cities called the Decapolis to the south and to the east side of the Sea of Galilee. These cities were exemplars to Hellenistic culture and power. There were temples to worship idols, bathhouses, stadiums, theaters. These were all unclean places to go. Certainly, they were all bad to any practicing Jew. Now, remember earlier when Jesus sent his disciples out, he instructed them not to go to the Gentiles, but to the Jews. And also remember that Jews saw non-Jews as ancillary to God's overall plan. So Jesus was making a pretty surprising statement to his disciples here. The kingdom of God would now be shared with the Gentiles who lived on the other side. While on their way, the Gospels record that a sudden storm kicked up and the disciples were very scared. They probably also thought that the storm was confirmation that they should not be going to the other side. Now, it's not uncommon here in the late fall and winter for storms to form very quickly and unexpectedly from the higher elevations on the eastern side of the lake. Within minutes, the Sea of Galilee can produce waves up to 6 feet tall, which can easily overwhelm a first-century Galilean fishing boat. A trip to the other side soon became a teachable moment for Jesus, who, by the way, was feeling pretty relaxed, given the circumstances. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Mark 4:38 through 41.
Gives a little perspective there in some of the backdrop. He quoted this story from Mark. We've read it from Luke. Same story, maybe a little bit of different wording. But as he said there, storms can whip up pretty fast on the Sea of Galilee, and this must have been a pretty big one because half of these guys that are in this boat, these disciples of Jesus, I mean, they were fishermen and they'd grown up on that lake, right? They had seen a few storms in their day, but this time they're fearing for their lives, so this must have been a big deal. They say that the word Luke uses here for squall is actually the Greek word for hurricane. So that kind of gives us a little bit of perspective on the force of this storm. The passage doesn't tell us if or what caused this storm. If maybe we could think about whether anyone or anything brought this storm to be. Some scholars even say that maybe Satan caused this storm because he didn't want Jesus to go to the other side. He didn't want Jesus. So not only are we going to the other side, but the story right after this, when they land on the other side, is the man with a legion of demons who is fighting that, and Jesus casts the demons out into the pigs, and maybe you know that story. And so some scholars say, well, Satan might have been trying to stop this whole thing, and so here's my opportunity, and maybe I can cause a storm. Luke uses the word rebuked for what Jesus said to the weather. Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves, and that's the same word that he uses when he talks about Jesus casting out demons in other places in the Gospels. So some scholars say that could point to maybe Satan had a little hand in this storm. Some say that God could have caused this storm in order to set up a little object lesson for the disciples, right? And for anyone else, including us, who would read this story later. Maybe God was testing those disciples, and so he sent this squall to see how they'd handle it, to reveal the level of their faith. Or maybe it was just a natural occurrence that happened because the right gusts blew through the right hills at the right time, and it just happened to create this perfect storm. The elements were right, and it brought it all together, and Jesus and his disciples just happened to be caught in the middle of it. I don't know for sure who or what was behind that storm. And that's kind of like the storms that we face a lot of times in our lives too. Problems and pain and suffering and disease and relational conflicts and financial crises and depression and grief and so many other things come blowing into our lives, and it can be overwhelming and debilitating. It literally could be an attack of the devil, or it could be a test from God. Or maybe it's just the simple fact that we live in a fallen, sinful world and people get sick and governments wage wars and economies crumble. What we face could just be the natural consequences of living in this fallen, sinful world. I guess what I'm saying is, no matter the source, there are storms in life. You've faced them. Maybe you're in one right now. All of us can relate to these disciples on that lake trying to weather out the storm that just seems like it's going to capsize everything. Well, those disciples went to Jesus, who was sleeping through it all, which I don't know whether we noticed it. This is probably the first miracle of the story, right? Jesus is sleeping in a hurricane, right? So that's probably the first miracle that we need to recognize here. But or maybe it's saying how exhausted he was from dealing with all those crowds for so long. But anyway, Jesus wakes up, he rebukes the wind and the raging waters. The wind dies down, the waters stop churning, and it says all was calm. Much like what we just saw where he was on that boat on the Sea of Galilee. It obviously wowed the disciples. Then Jesus gets to the heart of the whole thing and says, "Where is your faith?" We all have faith in things. There are all sorts of belief systems out there, sure, and religions spanning all sorts of things, and there have been a lot of those things. So spiritually, religiously, we have faith in things, a whole lot of different things. Even people that say they don't believe in anything, there's still things that we believe in. What do you get when you cross a Mormon missionary with an atheist? Someone who rings your doorbell for no apparent reason. Here's one of my favorites. I got to get it right. Did you hear about the insomniac, dyslexic agnostic? He'd stay up all night wondering if there was a dog. Maybe play it back later and figure that out. But anyway, agnostic, atheist, whatever. There are all sorts of people, and even the people that say, I don't know if there's really a God to believe in. I mean, we still put our faith in things, even if we're not necessarily putting our faith and our trust in a God of sorts. I mean, even an atheist has faith that his car is going to start in the morning, or that her chair will hold her up when she sits down, or that the caffeine in their coffee is going to help them function on a Monday morning after they've turned their clocks ahead. All of us put our faith in a lot of different things. And the disciples had faith, but Jesus' question gets to the heart of the matter, and he says, "Where is your faith?" No doubt their faith was in their boat, right? They had faith in that boat. When they set out across the lake, they had faith in that boat, in the oars. They had faith in their lifetime of knowledge of life on the sea, right? I'm sure the guys that weren't fishermen had faith in the guys that were fishermen, and they put their faith not only in all the supplies and different things, but also in these fishermen who knew how to handle a boat. And all of that is great when the weather's cooperating. And I'm sure that they were in a sturdy boat and they had sailed many a trip across that lake. They knew what they were doing, but this storm capsized everything that they had faith in. So Jesus said, "Where is your faith? Where is your faith? What do you rely on in life, and how does that work for you when the storms blow in?" Because I think we need to know that it's not so much the amount of our faith, but where it rests. That's the most important thing. Just a few chapters later in Luke, Jesus taught that if we have just a tiny bit of faith, a mustard seed of faith, we can make mountains move. It wasn't so much the amount of faith, but who or what that faith is in. That's the important thing. Sometimes I think we're guilty of treating faith like a weapon, especially in a storm. We say, well, if you just have enough faith, that problem will go away. If you just believe it enough, somehow magically God is just gonna do his thing. But if it's not happening, it's because you don't have enough faith. Faith isn't a weapon that we can use to manipulate God to get what we want. That is not how faith works. That's a misunderstanding of faith. Instead, at the risk of sounding simple, maybe too simple, I don't know, I'm just a simple kind of guy. Yeah, I went to seminary, but those guys are smart. And I just, made it. I made it out of Kansas with the wind blowing behind me, I guess. But I think maybe we can simplify faith to this. Go ahead and put just 2 words: trust God. But notice there's more than just that up there. Trust God, period. Whatever the circumstances, even if things don't make sense, even when everything is going wrong, even in the storm and it seems like we're going down with the ship, trust God, period. Believe that God is who he says he is, that he loves like he says he loves, that his promises are true, that even when you can't see him, even when it seems like he's asleep, even when it seems like he's oblivious to your situation, God has a plan and you can trust him. Period. Where is your faith? In your circumstances, that everything's just going to happen in life and all is good? In your abilities, maybe you're good at this. I can handle this. I've got faith in myself. And maybe your faith is in your bank account. Well, if something goes wrong, I've got a little tucked aside for a rainy day, right? For a storm. We put our faith in our finance. We put our faith in the people around us. Well, if something goes wrong, so-and-so will help me take care of it. We put our faith in our wisdom. Well, we'll figure it out. In the government, we won't even go there. Maybe you just put your faith in your stable, predictable life. Everything's just gonna work. Where is your faith? Is your faith in all of those things, or is your faith ultimately in Jesus? Now, I have no doubt that if I was in that boat, I would have been the first one going to wake up Jesus in that storm. I guess I'm the big sissy, right? I'm pretty sure I would have run to Jesus and tried to shake him awake probably before anybody else. But maybe that's not the worst thing to do in a storm, right? I mean, if the last 2 sermons taught us anything, they taught us that we need to learn to come to the end of ourselves and to be desperate for Jesus. That's what blind Bartimaeus did, and that's what this woman in that crowd did when they came to Jesus and they called out to him and they reached out to him. That's what he wants us to do, to come to him. But I wonder if instead of crying out to Jesus, coming to Jesus and crying out for the storm to pass, Jesus, make this all go away. Instead, maybe Jesus wanted those disciples to come to him and cry out for more faith instead. Sometimes God calms the storms in our lives. He heals the sickness. He brings a job at just the right time. He brings justice to the oppressed and reconciliation and healing to the brokenhearted. And sometimes God calms storms. Sometimes he doesn't. People die, wars rage, economies collapse, people are oppressed and taken advantage of, and God does not intervene. And I think you're like me, that my heart breaks for those who go through all kinds of suffering. And sometimes we see God calming storms and we rejoice. And sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he says, hang on and trust me. Period. Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he just take away all the hard things in life? I mean, that's a huge question that a lot of people have said a lot of things about over the years, and we could let that take us in a lot of different directions today. But this story, as we stay true to these 4 verses today, this story tells us a couple of reasons why maybe why God allows storms in our lives. And I think we get a clue of one reason when we see where they were going. They were headed directly to the other side. We heard about that. The region of the Decapolis, those 10 towns, and the Gerasenes, where this crazy man was fighting a legion of demons that had been tormenting him for who knows how long. Jesus was going to the other side of the lake in order to free that man from his suffering. But Jesus' plan for that man meant that the disciples had to go through a storm. They didn't have any clue what was waiting for them on the other side. They didn't know how Jesus was going to work in that man's life and transform him from the crazy lunatic that he was to a man sitting calm and in his right mind and ultimately a missionary to those 10 towns. It was going to be so worth it, but they could only see the storm. Could it be, and I'm just throwing things out there, could it be that sometimes we have to endure difficulty so someone else can get the help they need from Jesus? Sometimes the storm isn't about you. It's hard to hear because we think most everything needs to be about us. But sometimes I think we have to endure difficulty because that's the path that Jesus is using to minister to someone else, maybe even through us. Sometimes the storm isn't about you. I think we hear that in this story. Another thing I think we can get from this story has a lot to do with growth and maturity. The disciples learned more about who Jesus was and how to trust him because of that storm. A peaceful cruise across the lake would not have grown their faith like that storm did. Now, I love days like this, sunny days, right? And, I'm probably gonna hook that dog up to the leash, and we're going to go out on a walk this afternoon, and we're going to just bask in that sunshine, and it's going to be great. And even though it's like 52 degrees today, we're going to feel like it's 100 because we've been dealing with not so 50 degrees, right? So 50 degrees in October feels a whole lot colder than 50 degrees in March. I'm just saying, just whatever. But I love a sunny day. I love days when so 3 or 4 days a week I run just to try to keep my girlish figure, but just try to. I was hoping there wouldn't be too many giggles there, but so 3 or 4 days a week, which means 3 or 4 days a week I don't run. And I like those days a whole lot better than the days when I do run. I love vacation days when I head out of town and go do and there's no work or other difficult thing. We just relax, But there's something about there's not a lot of learning or growing that happens on vacation. Vacation is great. It's good, but there's not a lot of learning and growing that happens on vacation. And I don't get any faster or stronger on my days off of running. The hard days make us stronger. And I believe that part of Jesus' plan on that day on the Sea of Galilee and part of his plan for us as we go through the storms in our lives is that those things will strengthen our faith in him. Peter, the Apostle Peter, was on that boat that day. And I think we see from evidence later on in his life that he learned that lesson. He actually wrote in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, "In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you've had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials." We could probably insert storms. "These have come so that the proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." Storms reveal where our faith is. Where is your faith? And it helps us to grow our faith. This story, just 4 verses of these disciples on the Sea of Galilee, I'm sure it seemed a whole lot more, worth a whole lot more than just 4 verses in the Gospels when the disciples had gone through it that day. It was enormous. You've been through storms. You know what that is. Some of you are walking through storms that seem like it's crazy and you don't know what to do and where to turn. And when you turn to Jesus, it seems like he's asleep. I don't have answers for why. But I do know that even when we can't see it, we can trust God. Period. So I think we still need to be answering that question today. Where is your faith? Let's watch this together.
Life can bring us storms. Those moments where we wander, wonder, doubt. The journey doesn't stop, but the progress does. It can be lonely, painful. Sometimes we try to stare it down, as if we could somehow will it to go away. Or we think we can go toe-to-toe and come out the other side, unscathed. We often forget just how small we are. The truth is, storms are inevitable. But when they appear, we have a protector, a savior who knows a thing or two about calming storms, a God who is a stronghold in times of trouble. In our weakness, He is strong. In our fear, He is courage. In our desperation, He is peace. Yes, storms are inevitable, but our God is invincible.